Welcome to the Navigators. This is an interview series dedicated to telling the stories of people at the forefront of food and beverage in Asia. I'm delighted to be joined by Matthew Ona. Matthew Ona is an executive chef at the Vol Group. The Vol Group run numerous of the best restaurants in both China and Asia, including Ultraviolet, The Cut, Mr. and Mrs. Bund. Matthew, it's great to have you here. Can you introduce yourself for our viewers and listeners?
Sure. Well, thanks for having me on. As you just heard, I am the executive chef for one of the brands of Vol Group, which is The Cut Concepts, which has a couple different outlets in Shanghai. That's primarily been going for about seven or 8 years now, and slowly has eyes to expand within China in terms of steaks. And that's really what it was originally known for, steaks. And then the brand has kind of grown. And I originally came to China around 11 years ago now. So 11 and a half years ago was my first stint in China in People's Square. And I had actually, before that, had come from the Bahamas, where I was working on a small island as a chef of a very boutique hotel. And then kind of before that in Napa Valley and Los Angeles area, where I worked at a winery as being executive chef for a winery. I went to also a baking and pastry school there. I staged a little bit at the French Laundry while I was doing both at the same time. And before that, Atlanta and Philadelphia and New York. And that's where I kind of started actually officially, I would say, cooking. I had done it for many years before that, but went to the Culinary Institute of America up in Poughkeepsie, New York. And then just kind of one thing always led to another. And then here in China, we've just stayed and made it home.
Nice. And what brought you to China in the first place?
There was a place called Napa Wine Bar and Kitchen, which is still around. And they were originally looking for a chef with experience. And so I was in the Bahamas, and somebody on the island actually recommended me to the gentleman, Philippe Husser, who is the general manager and owner. And small world, they just had connected me because I had met them at the winery. And so they put two and two together. And then one day I was on a small, tiny island in the Caribbean. And the next I was arriving in Pudong, getting a ride downtown Shanghai.
And that was 2010, right?
Yeah.
So you've been in Shanghai since 2010. How do you think the cuisine, like the dining cuisine, has evolved in Shanghai over the last decade?
Well, over the decade, it's very different from when I first came, because there were a lot of foreign restaurants, but they were all kind of either high end or perceived to be gourmet, and the market was pretty young in its infancy as well. It was just starting to pick up. The golden years had just started to kind of hit for Shanghai and the market. And then you have things that have happened within the last, say, 5 to 6 years or 7 years, where you have social media, and then you have WeChat, and then every couple of years, kind of the base develops and the standards go higher and higher, because everybody can see the same thing of what's happening in Shanghai or Shenzhen or Beijing or different cities instantaneously the same night. So now the growth and the market changes very quickly, at least for F&B, where it used to be like you'd see a shift every maybe 2 or 3 years. The first 5 or 6 years I was here, and then it started to rapidly change to like 2 years, a year and a half, and now it's kind of like 13 months. New things will happen, new concepts, new trends, and it will go very quickly.
What are some of these shifts that you've experienced over this decade, some of the more recent shifts?
Well, you have a market now that's really excited to try new things. I mean, obviously with the advent of social media, people will see that looks really good, as we all do it. I do it. I'm guilty of it. Like, wow, that dish looks great. I want to try that kind of venue. I want to see that experience. So before, you had a base that was pretty conservative, and they were looking like a Western thing would always be like a mushroom soup, a Caesar salad, a steak, and like a lava cake, which is great. But I mean, it rapidly evolved into using French chocolates and Wagyu steaks, and of course, the different kind of cuts in beef. And now you have things where anything kind of goes. You like, we're doing things now where before we would do like a salmon tartare years ago. Now we do a tasting of trio of dishes. So we, on one dish, we will have an entire sampler almost. And whether it's raw fishes or it's different elements all combined. So we do a salmon tartare that's sliced, pounded perfectly, and then it gets an orange and homemade fermented chili kind of sauce on top. And then we do a campachi with black truffles and lemon zest. And then we have a tuna taro, which is lightly pounded out, and it has a citrus soy with calamanzini on top. And everybody loves it. Where years ago, you would never get, like, nobody would be okay with that. It would be too confusing. The flavors, it wouldn't be as wild. And it's not even really wild now, but it's just all the flavors, everything is a lot more open to experience things. So it's been great the last 5-6 years being here.
So just on that, you talked a lot about like mixing of flavors. In your new book, you like talk a lot about fusion dishes. So one of the favorite ones that I saw was the spicy Mao fettuccine. So I'm curious then, like, what are your different sources of inspiration? How do you go? What's that process of blending different flavors together?
Well, there's a few things that didn't make it in there too. So we also did, with the Mapo tofu fettuccine, it was, everybody likes spaghetti, and they usually have to, spaghetti, fettuccine, any kind of noodle is pretty much widely accepted. And so we do it where it looks very Western, but then it tastes very Asian, or Chinese for that matter. And in that case, we also did a lot of different things on brunch menus. You can be pretty playful. So we did what I called the baozone, which is a bao filled with pizza. It'd have like Italian sausage, fried basil, cheese, and everything, and then you would toast them, and you'd have these sorts of things that just kind of naturally kind of work together. Nothing really fights. The trouble is when people try to go to the extreme. They try to go outside the family of flavor that would work. So you'll have certain things like go together, no matter where it's from. And so, if you have a little bit of nori in a seafood or even like a chicken dish, it's kind of acceptable because those flavors match, but nobody's going to use like nori on a steak, because what's the point? What would be the point of having seaweed on top of a big juicy steak, right? So it's kind of those things where it's like, that sounds good and it will work. You just have to kind of finesse it a little bit. And we get a lot of feedback from people where when we're initially trying things out, the way I usually do it is I have the dishwashers and the service staff come over and try it first. And if they smile and say a little bit, then I know it's okay. Or if they give a strange look and the plate's not touched, you're a little too far off course. And there's been a few misses there. I won't talk about those, but with the Mapo fettuccine, I think that one came from a great chef, Brian Chan, and he was doing something like that from a different concept. I said, oh, you should put that with fettuccine and you should put that with linguine and do it like this. And then it just kind of took off from there. And then eventually we started putting Parmesan and other stuff on it because those salty notes work with the spiciness of like the Mapo sauce. So in a weird way, those kind of umami and those salty flavors work together. So it's kind of interesting to see what shakes out.
I like that you've got your kind of the internal testing first, and that's how you know if you're onto something or not.
Yeah, usually. I mean, the eyes and dishwashers are usually my first go-to people, and they'll let you know if it's interesting. If they're looking at it, you kind of know, and then you kind of filter it out to the kitchen people. I usually call somebody from a different department to try it, and then I'll call the service team and then the front of the house manager. And by that time, it's kind of warmed up. I was developing something in the works, kind of like a conceptual idea lately we have, a bunch of steaks and big pieces of meat or things that are roasted at the cut, because that's kind of the restaurant style. Of course, it's a modern steakhouse with a bunch of other things. And then the sous chef and I started to take XO sauce and a bunch of other ingredients, kind of almost doing like a wok style beef without the beef. And then we end up searing it completely blue, this Wagyu A5 strip loin, and then searing it, then lightly tossing it like the XO sauce and everything in the pan, like it was a wok, and then we slice it like a steak. And that one was a direct hit. That one came out the gate ready to party. So it's something that we're going to kind of work on too. We also were doing like a gung bao chicken, and we were roasting half the chicken and then deboning the leg. So you had this beautiful roasted chicken on top, and on the base, it's just like kung bao sauce with all the different ingredients. So it looks almost like a French roasted chicken, but then when you bite into it, it's completely something different. So it's a new thing that we're working on, and I think it's going to take off.
Nice. So with that, how do you localize your that kind of Western dishes for the Chinese market? Like, do you even still need to do that in the way that's got more sophisticated?
No, not anymore. I mean, before it was always, we're in Shanghai, make things sweeter. People, the local clientele will respond to it. But I think for the items and the things that we're doing now, people want more of an authentic taste. They just don't want anything that's too wild yet. You know what I mean? There's anything that's maybe too outside the realm of comfortability, because the market's very new, it's vibrant, it's happening, it's evolving very quick. But there is sort of a don't venture too far out of what mainstream acceptability will be have, because it won't work. And then you see a lot of concepts where you have talented F&B individuals and talented chefs, and they come straight in and try to do molecular or other things, and it's just not well received because maybe the flavors aren't there, or it's just the whole style of eating they aren't comfortable with. So a lot of it too is all in how you present it, I found. So we've been doing picture menus for the last 5 or 6 years now for every venue, even my consulting. And the reason I tell them to do that is there's a perception in the Western world, if there's pictures on the menu, it's a cheap place, right? Whereas here, every menu has pictures on it. And then Western restaurants typically don't have that. And now you see a big shift in the last couple of years. I've noticed once I've started doing it, because we've had a bunch of projects approach me and Matteo, the guy who did the photography with my book, that it's just an easier way to communicate with the clientele, because they might be very excited, but just the text only, it's really hard to kind of take that journey. If you've never tried it before and you have no necessarily reference to get to it, the pictures are a great, phenomenal way to let them feel comfortable in their choices. And that's what you want.
So just with that, so I guess, and the other thing you really talked about was authenticity. So, rather than go, so just how important is like creating like an authentic experience of like where that food is from, where that flavor is from, like making it as true almost out of China as it, and replicating that kind of in China.
That's always a great question that people ask. But for me, because I'm American, we have almost every culture in the world. So it's hard to bring that one traditional American thing when we're influenced by everything in the world there. You grow up and then you go from either New York or California, where anything goes. You have a melting pot of cultures. So for me, I don't have like, I'm an Italian guy from Napoli, so I know that this is the traditional. For me, it's always a great question to have, and I don't know how to respond, because for me, it's just, anything goes. Should we have, wild grains with toasted creams and other things together? Sure, because I'm from Minnesota, where we would have more Nordic things, but then we also have a huge populations from around the world where you'd have, you name the cuisine, it's all there. So I think more the traditional chefs that either come from Spain or Italy or France or Germany, where it's the basis of the cuisines that we all have in America, they are more the torchbearer of some of those things. And that's usually where the real passionate chefs are. And they're either they adapt to China and the market, or they have some difficulties when they're here.
What do you mean by adapt?
Well, by adapting, I think you'd have to make certain compromises where, people will and won't accept, say, certain Italian things, right? Where certain Italian dishes, very traditional, very native to their region, just will not be accepted here because they're not familiar with it, or it's just not the flavor profile. So you have some really talented Italian chefs, and they're super passionate. They're making their own pastas. They're bringing over their bronze die machines, and then they're creating these wonderful combinations. But it doesn't hit with the market. So they either make them sweeter, or they get a little saltier, or they try to add some Asian ingredient to it. And by the time they kind of get to where they think they need to go, the response is not what they want, and they get a little dejected. As I think it happens to every chef from time to time in their career, but especially here when you're going for such drastic, your home country to China, it's a big shock.
I think that kind of leads quite nicely into the next question was around for someone who's looking to establish themselves in China F&B, what is that kind of piece of advice you would give them?
Well, I say you often come into Shanghai one of two ways. You know exactly who you are, exactly, what you want to accomplish. And you kind of know yourself before you come here. Or you have as many oftentimes before the other cases they're not sure who they are. They get lost in some of the hype, because you can have these extraordinary events happen where, like, I think in the first year I was here, I had done a few TV shows. I was in a few magazines. I was in a calendar. It was weird, Mr. December for Napa Valley. I still laugh at it, right?
I need a copy.
No, we'll send it to you. Send it to you. But I expect you to put it up on the wall, of course. And it becomes like you can easily get lost because the city is flush with investors and people with new concepts. You have a few people that come in with a lot of hype, but then they absolutely get lost into the scene, into everything. So I think when you're going to come into China directly, know what you want to do, have the conviction. Here, it's all about continually pushing and never stopping, because you will eventually get there. You just have to keep going. And there's some very low points where you think, maybe I won't make it here. Maybe it won't be successful. Maybe, my brand or whatever I'm trying to launch here doesn't connect with the audience. But it's really about persistence. If I'm going to tell anybody anything, it's persistence and determination. That's what gets it, because you have to keep on pushing. I'm sure it's anywhere in the world, but I feel more so here in China just because of cultural things, work ethic things. You get a lot of no's before you start getting yeses. And so I'd come really hot the first year, and then I had kind of always been lucky to go from strength to strength through different properties and opportunities. But I said yes to almost everything. I never said no. And I think some people will, this show or this TV show, or I have to go to this city to do it. And I just always made the priority to just do it. So we went to Dongguan one time. It took like 3 days out of the week, but I ended up taking 5, and we have massive parties, and we're down on the bund at Shook at that point, and the restaurant is really booming. You're doing 3 million RMB a month in revenue. It's a lot. And then you have to take a couple of your team out of the whole environment, go do shooting, then come back, and you're just kind of exhausted. And it can go on like that for a while, but those opportunities come in the form of work. So if you're coming here, just be open to everything.
Okay, and be persistent.
Absolutely.
So what's a future trend that you see in the F&B market around you?
What I'm seeing now happen, like especially in the last year since COVID really hit, is a lot of people wanted to do their own thing, but it's a lot smaller scale. So you have a guy who did the vegan restaurant Dooley, right? And it seats about 12 people, 14 people max. And it's very tiny, but they do very specific things. And then you have lots of new ideas that are going smaller scale and then growing. Before, you would have people who are like, okay, I'm going to open a 200-seater, and you just go for broke. Major investments, major logistics, and all the kind of hassles you do with a larger size restaurant, kind of like the restaurants that we do now. You see the trend going that, and then you see a lot of online delivery and things going nationwide. So for that, you see a lot of people starting off with that small base, and then moving into either factories and then shipping throughout China. And it will still just be one small store, but they'll do massive business online or delivery. And then people also kind of connecting with the market a little more directly through social media, through videos, through cooking classes, through interactive demos, through product development, through co-branding. So these people now that are doing these smaller startups working through a bigger network. Before, there wasn't such a large network, especially for foreigners trying to work together. But now you'll see different collaborations. You'll see it's very mobile, and in terms of fluidity, in terms of what people will and won't do to kind of together. Where before it was, I have this very big place, we're kind of on a pedestal, we won't do that. And now you'll see pop-ups with, a bunch of different chefs or F&B personalities or KOLs, and they're happy to go to other places and try new things and let them kind of own the night at the restaurant, which is it's pretty fun to be a part of.
Yeah, that sounds really dynamic, and it's interesting that you can have something that's like quite a small space, a small restaurant, and it could have like evolve in so many different ways, and yeah, just be part of like a much broader network. Just because you mentioned it, I am curious. You said it was a vegan pop-up. What's your view? And obviously, as I know you as it's steak, it's meat. How do you feel about especially now I'm back in Europe, there's so much conversations around plant-based. Everything is plant-based, everything sustainability. What's your view on it around you in China and kind of what with you're doing?
Well, here's the funny thing. We had just done a wine dinner. This was 2 nights ago on Friday. And it was 27 people. And the guy calls me in a panic. One of our key people, key accounts, she wants to come, but she's vegan. So no problem. The thing is, it's always the attitude towards going meatless or going vegetarian or plant-based. It's, I can't do this, and I'm the chef and they can only have big steaks at the cut. And I told them, no, we're happy to have them. And she was wonderful. What we tried to do is mimic her experience for the other groups. So the first group's first course was a seared tuna and avocado and spicy kind of salad tartare. So for her, what we did is we made, we got gigantic chickpeas and then we seared them and slowly cooked them. And then we made a spicy lemon tahini. So it was creamy at the same time, but crunchy and clean. And for the second course, they had a smoked pork collar with a little bit of toasted rice. So we made her a vegan risotto that had vegetables that were grilled and smoking it with truffle. And so it just kind of matched the whole evening. And then her main course was like a orchetti, the ear-shaped pasta that we made for her, just using semolina and water, and then different types of sun-dried tomatoes, vine tomatoes. It had about 6 or 7 different tomatoes with olives and capers, and it was very meaty without having meat. And then, of course, dessert, we did cashew cream infused with vanilla, wild berries, toasted granola, shaved chocolate. So everybody was looking more at that than these monster porterhouses that we had for 20. I mean, there was about 7 or 8, so it's like 10, 12 kilos in porterhouses, and they're looking at this very lovely lady who's just enjoying her vegan meal. And for us, it's important that we embrace those people too. In terms of what do we see happening in the market now, you see a lot of the plant-based meats. I'm personally not a fan of, just because of the smells and the flavors that it kind of gives off. I'd rather just focus if we could use organic vegetables or things without pesticides and kind of go that route. But I appreciate what they're doing. And then, if you can get a bolognese that looks like a bolognese, but it's vegan and it kind of looks like a meat one, I'm all for all of that. I think there's going to be a big place for that in both traditional, meat eaters in the future. It's just, if we can get everybody kind of pared down a little bit, I think that'd be a great thing too.
Okay. And one last question. So what are your future plans personally and for you with the Vol Group? And I want to hear about the book.
Okay, sure. Well, yeah, my book, A Life in the Kitchen, we just printed it out this week. And so it's been going out and it's been very well received. I'm just about to do a few little pushes with releasing on social media, and I have a few other people mention it. There's a few articles coming out, as well as this week specifically coming July 1st, I'll be in one of the Chinese cinema movies, the movie 1921, where I have a small guest role as a Russian double agent spy who's also a barber. And so it was great. I had never acted. It was one of these ladies who had come to the restaurant. She was a casting agent, and she had saw me do a tableside presentation a few times. And then she said, there's this movie. Would you like to come? I thought, okay, it's just like a small TV, like CCTV2 thing, right? And then I get on the set with one of my boys, and it's a monster. There's 200-300 people there. It's like a full blockbuster movie. And, they had psyched me up. They're like, okay, for like weeks beforehand, they're like, all right, you're a grumpy guy who cuts hair. Don't smile, don't look. And then right before I'm meeting the main actor, Huang, they go, okay, now you two are best friends. And when you see him, you're just going to be smiling the whole time. I did what? And they go, okay, and action. And so I did the thing of like, are we supposed to do, I wasn't ready for it,
Yeah.
But I was professional. So it took a few takes, but it was really awesome. I think one of my sons will be one of the extras in it. So yeah, this week specifically, it's quite a big week. And then of course I'm doing this podcast, which is always great to branch out and introduce what I've been doing. My website keeps updating with the newest things. So the biggest part is the book is so heavy and thick that we're working on the digital version, which will be out in August. And that will be kind of easier to kind of share around the world. But of course, the print version is great, because one of the photographers that I've been doing all the menu shoots with, he's the one who did all the photography for the book. And it came about because we were looking at a chef's cookbook, which I won't name names, but he was a real good mentor to me when I was in New York City. And we saw his book and we were like, wow, this is surprisingly not what we would expect. And then we eventually just said, well, let's just do our own, because we have the pictures. So it was a great experience. It kind of runs through my time in Napa Valley, the Bahamas, Japan, and then of course, a big chunk here in Shanghai. So for me, that's a lot going on. For Vol Group, it's been great to join them for the last 7 or 8 months, where they have, Paul Perret, the 3 Michelin star chef. He runs Ultraviolet, Mr. and Mrs. Bun, Pollux, and they have a lot of exciting things, which I can't tell because they're still under lock and key. But in terms of like the cut concepts, my area that I work in, there's development that's going to be happening probably down in Shenzhen and Guangzhou and different places. So it's going to be a busy couple of years ahead.
All right, that sounds really good. Hey, that's kind of everything we wanted to go through, and it's been really great to have you on here.
It was my pleasure.
Thank you very much, Matt.
Thank you.